Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where I talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. Very excited to have with us Dr. Christopher Croner, a principal at Sales Drive and creator of the Drive Test, a sales assessment tool designed to identify top performing salespeople by measuring key personality traits. In the book I have had up here, he's also the co-author of Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again. I tell you what, if I was you and I've run a business, that is a hard thing to do, right? You want to make sure you hire the best people. He's helped over 1,500 companies worldwide in hiring and develop elite sales talent. I also like to have a shout out to Ann Clifford. Ann actually introduced me to the Sales Drive test. We've used it with a number of our clients with tremendous success. So thank you, Ann, for introducing me to Dr. Croner. Chris, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
Carl, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today and very much appreciate the opportunity to be of service to your audience.
Absolutely. And this is going to be, when I really mean this, folks, when I talk about we use this regularly, we do, that we found this to be really powerful. And we've used it on a regular basis. So once again, for those, Chris, who are not familiar of what this sales drive assessment is and why do we need to read this book and do this, can you describe to the audience what this is and why it's important?
Of course, the Sales Drive Assessment is a tool that companies use to identify candidates, as you mentioned, with the 3 non-teachable traits essential for success as hunter salespeople. That's what Sales Drive, my business, does. We help companies identify candidates with those characteristics. We started out, our research looking at everything that had been published on this topic academically. We started out, over 20 years ago now, looking at everything that had been published over the last, 85, almost 90 years now, in terms of what is it that leads to success as a salesperson, particularly a hunter, because again, it's that hunter role that most companies have the greatest degree of difficulty hiring for. So looking at everything that had been published academically as well as our own work, we found that, again, there are many characteristics that are important, things that are teachable, for example, like relationship skills, organizational skills, persuasiveness, all of those are important. But above and beyond any of those by far, again, are these 3 non-teachable characteristics that we found consistently differentiate the highest performing salespeople, particularly the hunters.
I love it. And so let's for those who might, I think people might intuitively get it, but explain to those who might not be familiar, what's the difference between a hunter salesperson and a farmer?
Of course, as we define it, a hunter salesperson is one who is responsible for new account acquisition. They're the ones who have to go out and bring in new accounts. The farmer salesperson is the one whom we define as the individual who needs to deal with existing accounts, make sure existing accounts are happy, sometimes grow existing accounts. There can be a hybrid in some cases, as you can imagine, between the two. The person whom, as some of our clients will describe it, has to hunt within existing accounts, the farmer/hunter kind of combination, if you will. But that's how we differentiate the roles. The hunter's the person who brings in the new accounts. The pure farmer is the person who deals with the existing accounts and makes sure that they stay on board.
Yeah, this is a powerful, once again, tool. And for one of the things I thought was really interesting you said there, because there's a difference, right, between sales skills and sales DNA, if you may. And that's what you were sharing with her. That, hey, there's these 3 characteristics that just commonly come up regardless of everything else, regardless of the background, regardless of what we've gone through. So how did you mentioned there was a lot of research behind it. And obviously you have your PhD. So it's not something like you just came up with the other day. What led you to this interest level? What led you to this? Wow, we need to figure out this why, and why, for your perspective, was it so important to figure this out?
Sure. So I got my start on the clinical side. My PhD is in clinical psychology, and I began to refocus as I was finishing up my PhD on exactly how I could apply that in more challenging settings, beyond, say, a clinical setting. And I began to, again, do coursework in industrial organizational psychology as well as clinical. And I was so fortunate as to, for example, during my internship, I had an extra rotation in delivering psychological consultation services to business management. When I was finishing my degree, just after I'd finished my degree, I attended a talk by Dr. Neil Whitmer of a company called Whitmer and Associates in the suburbs of Chicago that specialized in executive assessment. I'm sure you've seen sometimes companies will bring in a psychologist to sit down with a prospective CEO or president or VP of sales to determine if that person is going to be an effective leader. Well, of course, it's critical to sit down with someone, again, on the psychological side to make sure they've got the traits essential to be a leader. It's a very thorough process. So that can involve things like not only the interview, but also what's called an in-basket exercise, where we kind of put the person through a day in the life of a successful leader. Sometimes some intelligence testing, personality assessment, very, very thorough. Well, sales, of course, is the lifeblood of any company. You don't have a need for anything else if you're not selling something. So we wanted to design something, Whitmer wanted to design something as rigorous as that, only for salespeople. And that's why they brought me on board to begin to do that research back in 2002. And I began to focus on, okay, what is that leads to success as a salesperson? We found that, well, drive is important, motivation is important, but what does it mean for someone to be motivated as a salesperson? And so the best way to do that is to start out going back at everything that had been published academically, again, from the beginning, all the way back to the early 1900s. What leads someone to be successful in sales? What are the non-teachable characteristics that are essential for that role? And that's when we began to identify, okay, there are these three elements: need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism. At the same time, as I was beginning my work there, I was actually doing interviews with sales candidates and then following up thereafter with their managers to identify, okay, who's becoming successful, who's not, what's differentiating these people. And again, combining those two, we find it's these three non-teachable characteristics: need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism that are consistently leading to success. Need for achievement is the person who wants to do well simply for the sake of doing well, who's constantly focused on setting the bar high, jumping over that, setting it higher again the next time, and really pursuing excellence for its own sake. Competitiveness. The competitive salesperson really wants to do two things. Number one, they want to be the best in their team. They're always comparing their performance to their peers because they just need to know how they stack up, if you will, relative to the group. And then, of course, and when it comes to optimism, we're looking for the person who is certain that they will succeed and they're resilient when they face the inevitable rejection that a salesperson just has to deal with. So it's those three non-teachable characteristics altogether: need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism, that collectively we find create the perfect storm. And we refer to those as drive. The challenge, of course, being that past the age of 21, 22, there's not much you can really do to change the person's overall level of drive. It's kind of either it's there or it's not. So that's when we began to look at, okay, how can we assess this effectively? I met my business partner, my co-author, Richard Abraham, in 2003, 2004. We decided, okay, there's nothing out there that's rigorously going after these characteristics. And we decided to create the drive test, the first iteration thereof, back in 2004. Sales Drive began officially in 2005. We published Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again in 2006. The latest edition of our assessment was released in 2015. We're very proud to have worked with over 1,500 companies, as you mentioned, around the world. We've administered over 150,000 assessments worldwide. And again, it's I think what I enjoy most about it, what really led me to this particular topic, not only just because it's essential for any business, again, looking for all of those characteristics, but in terms of the characteristics that we're looking for, I think that, as my dad said when he read a copy of my book, he said, a lot of this is kind of about you, right? And I said, yeah, I identify many of those high achieving elements: need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism, the competitive salesperson who wants to be the best on their team and win that customer over their point of view. A lot of that I found in myself as I was growing up. So I think that kind of compelled me to have that natural interest. You need something that's going to compel you to be interested in any given topic. And I was very, very fortunate to be able to find something that I particularly found fascinating. I think that in any interview, it's interesting to do an interview with a prospective candidate. That's always a fun exercise. But when you have somebody who's a salesperson who can be very skillful at presenting themselves well, and you have to get underneath the surface and really understand what's going on with that person, what makes them tick, if you will, that's a very special challenge, and I enjoy that challenge as well. So that's what led me to have that natural interest in salespeople. Again, many people, it's the classic. Someone will ask someone in sales, what really led you to be in sales? And the person will say, well, I never thought I would end up in sales. Well, I never thought I'd end up studying sales. But looking at it psychologically, I don't think there's anything more important in terms of commerce. If you have somebody who's an effective salesperson, that makes the world go around. So if we can identify what makes these individuals who they are, what causes the best to differentiate themselves, that's really a special service that I can do for my clients. And it's one of the biggest mistakes people make is they think, when we're talking about an effective salesperson, I need somebody who's persuasive. You even see today, when you see articles about who's going to be successful in sales, they want somebody who's going to they have the gift of gab, where they like people, or they're persuasive, or they want to make money. All of those things are nice, but they're not the most important. It's those three characteristics I mentioned: need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism. Past the age of 21, 22, we can't do much to change them. Either they're there or they're not. That's why it's important to assess those as carefully as we can in candidates. Does that answer your question?
So, no, it does. So there are a lot of skeptical people out there who are especially probably listening on this podcast going, there's no way this works. There's no way that there's this causation and these three things that are taking place. Give us some examples of how you've been able to validate these results of that. There is clear correlation, right, between these three characteristics and high performing actual salespeople in real life market. So can you go through some, like, maybe you don't have to go into a 50-minute dissertation on this, but just summarize some of these key things that you've learned, which have validated and why it stood the test of time, right? You didn't just start doing this yesterday. This has been a 20-year effort that you've been able to validate time and time again. But give us some truth on that, yeah, one thing is getting a drive thing, but then validating after the fact that they were the top performing or did become the top performing salespeople.
Of course. Yeah. And again, starting way back in terms of just before I got started, there's the research on the topic that shows those characteristics are essential again and again. The correlation with, say, someone who's high in need for achievement, that tends to be, of the three elements we look at, by the way, the strongest correlation, the person who wants to do well for its own sake. That's consistently shown to be highly correlated with success in sales, competitiveness as well, and then optimism, then combining the three together and creating our assessment. The first thing you do before you, of course, you ever give it to a candidate officially is you validate the assessment. You want to make sure that you're seeing a strong correlation when you're creating the assessment with the assessment questions, a strong correlation between the assessment itself and sales performance. And of course, that's what we did. We made sure that we saw that, looking at people who were successful in sales, hundreds of individuals who had taken the assessment, and then thereafter we measured their performance. We had their supervisors, their managers rate their performance, and we look at the correlation between those two. We consistently saw strong correlations between the characteristics that we measure in the assessment and the person's performance. But then thereafter, with every company that we work with, especially the larger companies, we like to make sure that we give them the opportunity to receive their entire package of data, if you will, from all the candidates whom they assess. Mm-hmm. And then we look at the relationships between the scores on the assessment and their ratings of the person's performance. We consistently see, as you can imagine, the people that are strong in those characteristics, particularly, again, that need for achievement, as well as combining that with competitiveness and optimism, are consistently the highest performers again and again. So again, drive is not the be all end all. We need all the elements of the sales ecosystem, of course, like fit with the company culture, fit with the management style, fit with the compensation plan. All those things come together at the end of the day. But looking at that one piece, that non-teachable drive piece, we do consistently see not only in developing the assessment, but then thereafter with the clients with whom we've worked for the last 20 years consistently, that those who are high in drive, the individuals whom they hire who are high in drive, are the top performers. And of course, we have case studies on our website, and we have independent reviews of our assessment as well on sites like G2 and then Google reviews as well. So we're very proud of those.
That's fantastic. And once again, I was doing that for our skeptics who are out there. Once again, as somebody who's used your tool often, I've seen the correlation myself, but it's once again good to get it beyond just one person's, my own personal experiences. So let's go a step further of, why do people, I mean, this is one of those weird things of like, there's 33 million companies out there. Why aren't more people doing this? Why aren't more people taking the effort to do this assessment up front? I mean, this is just, to me, this is like a no-brainer. I literally recommend this for every single client that we're working with that are looking at hiring salespeople. Is it because of a lack of knowledge? Is it because they think they've got it figured out from their own processes? What holds people back from getting the right data to, once again, make better decisions?
It's a combination of all of those. And it really kind of depends on the size of the company and the sophistication of the company. So if you have a company that is relatively small and they're interviewing, say, candidates for the first time, or a manager who's interviewing candidates for the first time, oftentimes they don't know that there's an assessment out there that can go after those characteristics. People don't typically think about, is there a psychological test to determine if someone's going to be successful in this role? Their mind doesn't go there. They think, okay, I have to hire somebody for this job. I have to interview them. What am I going to do? I'm going to bring them in and I'm going to do my best to determine if this person is going to be an effective salesperson for me. An entrepreneur sitting down with a candidate, for example, is going to do their best to try to determine, is this person going to be successful for them? And that's where they can often get into trouble, because they'll sit down with that candidate and they'll ask them the traditional questions. Do you like people? Do you connect with people well? Sell me this pencil, things like that. And those questions don't get at whether the person actually will be successful. So again, they're doing their best to go after these characteristics. Or some will say, well, I have a golden gut. I just know the person's going to be successful. Well, again, you really need to bring in something scientific. You need to bring in a step-by-step process. And that's one of the things I enjoy most about what I do, particularly is working with entrepreneurs. They'll think, for example, another trap they'll run into is they'll think, well, I want somebody who's been successful previously to move into this role. And that's quite logical. But where they'll often get stuck is they'll bring in someone who's been successful, for example, at a very large company. Because they'll be thinking, okay, this person's been very successful at a very large company. Surely they must have had world-class sales training. I need somebody who's going to be up to speed quickly. Therefore, surely they'll bring that same degree of success to bear for us. But of course, the key question is, what really led to that person's success? Was it always their own effort, or was it really the fact that they had all that brand recognition and collateral material that really helping them out along the way? Ideally, I recommend when you're looking for somebody, particularly an entrepreneur, somebody who's going to hire their very first salesperson, I recommend, again, if you need somebody who's going to hit the ground running as a salesperson, looking for an individual with 2 to 3 years of relevant previous experience at a similarly sized company, as well as an overall drive score of a 4 or a 5 on the drive test. Again, 2 to 3 years of previous experience gives them sales 101. You don't have to give them that. I say at a similarly sized company because, of course, again, it can be very tempting when you see the people from the large company. So find someone who's done it before at a similarly sized company, and then look for the person with that high drive score that shows that they can maximize their potential, if you will, that they'll have that passion to execute on that knowledge. So.
Yep. No, I really, really important insights there. One of the things that I think is super interesting from the test is it can discern, because I've seen the results where it says there are inconsistent answers, right? So go into that, because one of the biggest concerns is somebody gaming a test. It appears like your tool actually can determine that and actually shows it in the results. Explain how that happens.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, again, you're exactly right. When it comes to assessments, it's one of the challenges that many have, is that they can be very easy for someone to size up the test, figure out what it's looking for, and fake their way through it. So, for example, if a test question says something like, I consider myself a persuasive closer, true or false? Well, again, a candidate, if they're looking at that question and they want that job, they're likely going to endorse that as true. Logically, they want to put their best foot forward. Or even if it says, rate this question from 1, not at all like you, to 5, exactly like you. Well, again, if it's a positive statement, the candidate wants to rate themselves a 4 or a 5. Again, they want to put their best foot forward. But then the challenge is the person just easily, games the assessment. So we use a question format designed to eliminate faking. It's called forced choice. And the research consistently shows that forced choice questions are effective at eliminating faking. And the way they do that is, for each question, the person gets a series of 3 statements, all of which are worded very positively. So a question, for example, may say something like, I consider myself a leader. I have great relationship skills. I'm very organized. Okay. Now, which of these is most like you and which one is least like you? We literally had a team of psychologists look at each statement on each question on the drive test and make sure they were all equal on what psychologists call social desirability. So now that forces the candidate to make some very difficult distinctions, but then it gives us a much better sense of their real priorities. And then, as you mentioned, as the candidates working their way through the assessment, we are also constantly monitoring their consistency as they respond to the questions, because as you can imagine, if they do try to fake the test, it's going to be very difficult for them to remember consistently what they ranked most and least across the entire assessment. So again, it's designed to be very robust in that regard.
No, I think that's a really critical part of the test. Once again, when you have that, and it's been interesting when we've seen that, it's an interesting conversation, right? Of like, why did this happen? When did it go through? And it provides a really, really good insights, and versus those where it clearly matches and says, yes, this is true. So that's fantastic. So we just got a couple minutes left, Chris. So I just want to do a few quick hitters. Of course, we're called the Measure Success Podcast Show. How do you measure success in your business?
Of course, in terms of the business, obviously just growing our company, constantly looking at results, constantly looking at, are we adding new companies? Are we adding new business? And we've been very, very fortunate the last couple of years. We've had more and more and more business. More and more businesses are coming on board, identifying, okay, we need to use an assessment. What can we do? What can we find? And we've been very, very astute in terms of looking at Google and the marketplace. How do we market ourselves well? So we measure success specifically on the growth of the business. How many new companies have come on board? How many assessments are we selling? How many subscriptions to the assessment are we selling? And then we're writing a partner program. Especially this year, that's our big focus. How many new partners are we bringing on board per quarter? So it's all about what you measure you can manage, if you will, or you can increase. So that's what we're focusing on.
Perfect. That's really good there. Okay, so we're once again just short on time here, so just quick answers. I'm always curious in highly successful people and their own personal habits that they're doing to help provide their best, do their best. Give me an example or a thing or two. Here we are. This is being recorded in early January 2025. And obviously the kind of classic time of New Year's resolutions for those who do those type of things. But what are some things that you have done, you've proven consistently that's helped you become a great business owner or entrepreneur?
There's really two sides. There's the business side and there's the personal side. On the personal side, I'd like to make sure that I'm always staying fit. So I'm at the gym 5 days minimum a week. That's something you can measure. You can measure your performance. I've got a scale, every single day, one that uses, it's sort of a process that it uses to look at, okay, not only your weight, but also the extent to which you're burning fat, et cetera, your body fat percentage. So I'm always looking at that every day. So that's what I do on the personal side. And then in terms of the work side, it's all about what we can measure day to day. And every single day in terms of habits, every single day before the workday, the day before, the night before, I plan out the next day. What are my key priorities for my business? What are the 3 key things I'm going to do that next day to contribute to those priorities? And when you go into your day with that day plan, not in terms of just responding to emails or responding to people reaching out to you, but what are you going to proactively do during that day and schedule time to do it? Those are the things that I do. And then at the end of the week, that Friday, like at the end of the day today, I will pull out my document from the previous week. Have I done all of those things? Have I engaged in all those activities each and every day to the extent that I asked for? And then kind of weighing all of that out. So that's what I do day to day on the business side and on the personal side.
Great insights there. So how do you measure success today in your personal life?
On the personal side, again, as I mentioned, what you can measure, you can manage, but it's always important to measure the important things. And some of the most important things on the personal side can be difficult to measure. I'm not married, I don't have children, but I certainly love my nephews. So I like to spend as much time with them as I possibly can, sharing as much as I can with them about things that I learned growing up, the things that I wish someone had told me, when I was going to school, things that led to success in my life, things that I can give to them, if you will. So I measure, I guess, the amount of time that I spend with them. And then again, I guess the personal side can also include your health. So I do measure, again, as I mentioned, every week, every Friday, I've got to record the data for the previous week, everything I've done in terms of not only the health side, going to the gym, but then my weight, body fat percentage, et cetera. So I look at all that on the personal side too. So a lot of measurement, but the things that are important, you need to measure as best you can.
That's right. Measure what matters, right?
Yep.
So finally, how can people, a book or two you'd recommend for our audience?
So as AI becomes a bigger part of our world, one of the biggest skills that we can build is the sort of things that are difficult to replicate. And I think Influence by Robert Cialdini, Dr. Robert Cialdini, is one of the most effective books I could recommend just in terms of persuasion, because persuasion is a skill that anybody can learn. Things like reciprocity, all of the things that he mentions in that book are critical. And those are the things that no matter what the business world is going to do in terms of artificial intelligence, et cetera, you'll always have as beneficial to you. Another book I'd recommend to your audience, if they're entrepreneurs, is The Entrepreneur Roller Coaster by Darren Hardy. It's a great kind of overview of all the things that lead to success as an entrepreneur. He was the previous publisher of Success Magazine. He had interviewed hundreds of people over the years who have been very successful in their own right and sort of distilled that into, okay, if you're an entrepreneur, what are the things that you can do step by step in all these various areas? So The Entrepreneur Roller Coaster is the second one I recommend.
Yeah, good recommendations, both of them respectively. How can people connect and learn more about what you're doing?
Thank you. Yes, salesdrive.info is our website. So go to salesdrive.info. If you'd like a complimentary assessment, you can get one right there. I'd be happy to, of course, schedule time to review it with you, particularly if you want to assess a sales candidate or current salesperson. It's my pleasure to be of service to you and your audience in any way that I can.
Chris, thank you so much for being a part of the Measure Success podcast today.
Carl, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to be of service. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And everyone else who's listening, I'm hoping you enjoyed this podcast. We're very grateful for the referrals we get and people who are asking to be a part of this. If you'd like the show, we encourage you to like it and share it, comment with others. That means the world to us. As we always like to say, wishing you the very best at measuring your success. Have a great day.
Thank you.